The courtroom smelled faintly of old varnish and lemon floor polish, the kind of scent that clung to wood worn by decades of whispered trials and public shame. The air felt heavier than it should, thick with murmurs from the gallery, each whisper a tiny blade slicing into the silence. This wasn't just another divorce hearing. For me, it was a battlefield, though the weapons were no longer rifles and strategy maps, but pens, papers, and poisoned smiles. I sat at the petitioner's table in my uniform's dress blues, not because the court required it, but because I needed the reminder of who I was before my life had been reduced to this. Every ribbon on my chest carried memories of sleepless nights, of comrades I buried, of sacrifices invisible to most people in this room. Here, those years of service had been stripped down to a single word on a docket: plaintiff. Yet I wore the uniform for a reason. It was my shield of honor in a place where honor was traded cheaply. Across from me sat the woman I once promised forever to. Her nails, manicured, sharp, painted a cold shade of crimson, drummed lightly on the polished wood as though this entire proceeding bored her. Beside her lounged the man she had replaced me with, a lawyer with slicked back hair, a tailored suit, and the kind of smirk that could curdle blood. He leaned back in his chair, exuding a lazy confidence that reeked of entitlement. He didn't look at me as a man. To him, I was just another obstacle to bill against, another soldier too naive to know how the game was played. "The judge is my friend," he said softly, loud enough for only us to hear, but sharp enough to draw blood. "You're leaving this room with nothing, soldier." My wife smiled at him, her lips curling into something between triumph and contempt, then tilted her head toward me. "He's too scared to even speak. Look at him." Her voice was laced with derision, as if my silence confirmed their victory. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and slid a document across the table with the ease of someone who thought the matter already closed. A property settlement. I scanned it quickly. The house, the savings, even my truck, all shifted into their possession by neat rows of legal phrasing. Robbery disguised as justice. "Sign it now," he demanded, tapping the page with his manicured finger. For a moment, I let the silence hang. The weight of the room pressed against me. The eyes of strangers, the impatience of the judge, the smug certainty of the two people who once shared my life, but now sat united against me. I could almost hear their thoughts. The soldier won't fight back. He doesn't belong in this world of legal maneuvering and courtroom games. They were wrong. I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I raised my eyes slowly, locking onto his. My voice came out calm, even casual, though inside it carried the steady rhythm of a soldier's march. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They cut through the pretense, slicing into the arrogance that had filled this room. I saw a flicker in his eyes, just for a moment, a hesitation he tried to bury beneath his smirk. And in that instant, the balance began to shift. 3 years earlier, if anyone had told me I'd be sitting across from her in a courtroom, I would have laughed. Back then, she was the anchor I believed could hold me steady through any storm. We met while I was still in active service, my life consumed by duty, discipline, and deployments. She said she admired those qualities, my loyalty, my structure, the sense of honor I carried in everything I did. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But admiration, I would later learn, isn't the same as love. Even in those early days, there were hints. She adored the uniform, yes, but more than that, she loved the attention it brought her. At events, I would notice her eyes glowing, not because she was proud of me, but because others were watching her. She relished the way officers' wives leaned in to hear her stories, how powerful men glanced her way when she laughed. To me, she was my wife. To her, she was stepping onto a stage. When I rotated back stateside and took a desk roll at the base, the shift was immediate. My hours were long, but the work was steady. I thought it was a blessing, that we could finally build a home together without the constant fear of deployments. To her, it was suffocating. She complained about the monotony, about how I wasn't the same man she married, about how my world seemed smaller now that my boots weren't caked with desert dust. I chalked it up to adjustment. Military families often fracture in the silence between wars. The soldier comes home whole in body, but changed in spirit, while the spouse craves the excitement that the battlefield strangely provided. I told myself this was normal, that with time, she would see the gift in stability. But the cracks widened. First came the work dinners that stretched past midnight. Then the phone calls she took in the garage, whispers carrying through the thin walls. Soon, it was the sudden transformation of her appearance. Nails always done, hair perfect, clothes that looked more suited for a runway than a grocery store. Each explanation was rehearsed. Networking, social obligations. I just want to look good for you. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. The truth didn't arrive softly. It crashed into my life in the ugliest way possible. I came home early from a training seminar one evening, eager to surprise her. My boots hit the hallway floor quietly, but laughter reached me before I reached the living room. When I stepped inside, the scene burned itself into my memory forever. 2 half-full wine glasses on the coffee table, his suit jacket draped casually over the chair I usually sat in, and my wife, flushed with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in years. And him, the lawyer. He didn't flinch when I walked in, didn't stammer, didn't scramble. He simply leaned back and offered me a smile, smug, deliberate, almost rehearsed. Guess you're home early, soldier. It wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery. A declaration that I had been outplayed in my own house. Later, I would learn the full extent of their entanglement. Not only was he her lover, he would also become her attorney in the divorce, with a connection to the judge presiding over our case. A triangle of betrayal, personal, professional, judicial, woven tightly against me. I knew then that I wasn't walking into a fair fight, but I'd been in unfair fights before, and I had never stepped into one unprepared. Back in the courtroom, the lawyer's pen still hovered above the contract he expected me to sign. I didn't move. I let the silence linger, let them believe I was hesitating out of fear. To them, my stillness was weakness. But silence can be the sharpest weapon, especially when it hides something deeper. For the past 3 months, I had been preparing, not through the expensive theatrics of divorce attorneys, but with the patience and discipline the military had drilled into me. Soldiers are taught to gather intelligence before launching an offensive. You don't charge blindly into an ambush. You map the terrain, study the enemy, and wait for the moment when one precise strike can unravel an entire operation. That's what I was doing here. While they drank wine and toasted their cleverness, I had been quietly building my own case. I traced financial records, uncovering hidden accounts she thought I'd never see. I spoke with mutual friends she'd alienated along the way, people who had no love left for her lies. Their testimonies were recorded, signed, sealed. I even kept a meticulous journal, noting every discrepancy, every late-night disappearance, every sudden expense that couldn't be explained. But the crown jewel of my preparations was something far more damning. A friend of mine in CID, Criminal Investigation Division, helped me set up a perfectly legal wire during one of their celebratory dinners. The arrogance was staggering. They laughed openly, clinked glasses, joked about how the judge would sign whatever we put in front of him. The lawyer's voice, smooth and confident, spelled out the strategy in detail. Bleed me dry, leave me humiliated, and celebrate in Cabo once it was all over. And then there was her laugh, the laugh I used to live for, the one that once meant joy, in our small kitchen, the sound of warmth and home. Now, in that recording, it was twisted into something cruel. Proof that the woman I loved had become someone I no longer recognized. That audio file now sat inside my briefcase, labeled neatly as Exhibit Z. Across the table, the lawyer tapped the paper again. "Sign it, soldier. Save yourself the humiliation." I leaned back slowly, keeping my expression unreadable. They saw a man cornered. What they didn't see was the quiet satisfaction of a soldier who had already set the trap. "You sure about that?" I asked, my voice calm, almost amused. He blinked, just once, but it was enough, because I knew what was coming. The judge cleared his throat, his voice dry with the weight of routine. "Mr. Walker, either sign the agreement or state your objection." I stood slowly, buttoning my jacket as if I had all the time in the world. My heartbeat was steady, almost unnaturally so. Years in uniform had trained me to find calm in chaos, to treat tension not as an enemy, but as an ally. I looked at the judge, then at the lawyer, then at the woman who used to share my home. "Your Honor," I said evenly, "I do have an objection, and an additional piece of evidence." The lawyer rolled his eyes, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "Your Honor, this is a stall tactic, transparent. There's no new evidence on record." His smirk was returning, like a gambler doubling down on a bad hand. Without a word, I reached into my briefcase and set a small digital recorder on the table. Its presence was unassuming, but the air seemed to change the moment it touched the wood. The gallery shifted, whispers rippling like wind through dry grass. "Actually," I said quietly, "there is." I pressed play. Her boyfriend's voice filled the room, dripping with arrogance. "Don't worry, babe. The judge will sign whatever we put in front of him. We'll bleed him dry and toast to it in Cabo." A sharp intake of breath echoed from the gallery. My wife's laughter followed on the recording. Unmistakable, cruel, triumphant. He's too scared to fight back. By the time he realizes, the house, the accounts, everything will be ours. The sound of betrayal carries differently when heard aloud. It's not just words, it's exposure. It's the peeling back of every mask someone has ever worn. Gasps swept the courtroom. My wife froze, her face drained of color. Her lawyer sat motionless for a moment before springing to his feet. "Objection! This is an invasion of privacy." The judge cut him off sharply, his gavel cracking against the wood. "Overruled. Continue the recording." I did. And then came the line I had been waiting for, the nail driven directly into their coffin. "Even if he tries, I'll bury him. The judge is my buddy. We've done this before." The judge, who until that moment had seemed almost bored, suddenly leaned forward. His gaze locked onto the lawyer with a chill that could freeze blood. "Is that your voice, counselor?" The color drained from the man's face. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, the courtroom's power no longer belonged to him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was suffocating. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt deafening against the stillness of a man being unmasked. In that silence, I felt the tide turn. The silence in that courtroom became the breaking point. The lawyer, once smug and untouchable, was now cornered by his own arrogance. The judge's face was carved in stone as he ordered all asset transfers frozen and announced that misconduct would be investigated. My wife's eyes darted wildly, searching for a way out, but there was none. Court adjourned early that day, but for me, the battle was only beginning. I walked straight from the courthouse to the district attorney's office, carrying the rest of my evidence in a neat, heavy folder. Bank transfers from hidden accounts, emails laying out fraudulent schemes, a photograph of them vacationing in the Maldives during what she had claimed was a women's leadership conference. Each piece of paper was another crack in the fortress they thought unbreakable. The DA flipped through the evidence slowly, her expression hardening with every page. "Mr. Walker," she said at last, "this isn't just family court fraud. This is conspiracy, financial misconduct, and bribery of a public official." By the time I walked out of that office, warrants were already being drafted. The following week, when I returned to court, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. No longer was I the silent, cornered soldier. Now the air was charged, heavy with the weight of criminal inquiry. Internal affairs officers stood at the back of the room. The lawyer didn't meet my eyes. The judge, once a friend to my enemies, now shuffled papers nervously, aware that his own career hung by a thread. "Before we proceed," the new presiding judge said, "this court has been made aware of ongoing criminal inquiries involving parties present. All divorce proceedings are suspended pending the outcome. Furthermore," he turned, his eyes like steel, "Mr. Cole, you are hereby removed from this case. Bailiff, escort him for questioning." The gasp from my wife was almost theatrical. She reached for him, desperate, but he didn't even glance back as he was led away. I leaned close enough for her to hear me and whispered, "You told me I had no choice. You were right. I didn't. I had to destroy you." Her face went pale, because she knew it wasn't over yet. 3 weeks later, the story broke. Local headlines first: prominent attorney and lover accused of bribing judge, defrauding veteran in divorce case. Within days, national outlets picked it up. The recordings replayed on every channel, her laugh echoing across millions of living rooms, his arrogant promises stripped of their power. Her world collapsed in slow motion. He was disbarred within a month, facing years in prison. The judge was suspended, charged with corruption. And my wife, once so sure of her untouchable plan, now stood as a co-conspirator, her accounts frozen, her luxury car seized, her new condo repossessed. Even her family, once vocal in their disdain for me, fell silent as they mortgaged their own home to cover her mounting legal fees. The final court hearing gave me full custody of the children, sole ownership of the assets, and something no ruling could ever quantify: my dignity. As the gavel fell, she sat trembling, realizing the game she thought she had mastered had consumed her instead. But life has a way of twisting irony into the tale. Months later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Her handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged. Inside was a plea: "I can't pay rent. I can't find work. Please, just enough to get me through, for the kids' sake." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she had done. Only the assumption that I would still be the man she once knew, the man who would rescue her no matter the cost. I placed the letter in a new envelope. Inside, I slipped a photograph I had taken the previous weekend. Me, the kids, my father, and my new partner, smiling on the deck of a cabin I had just bought in the mountains. On the back, I wrote, "You were right. I had no choice. I chose to live well without you." 2 weeks later, I heard she had been evicted, living in a run-down motel at the edge of town, sharing space with strangers. Meanwhile, I was signing a contract for a major security project overseas, a 6-figure deal that would secure my family's future. The lesson was clear, sharper than any court order. Betrayal doesn't just burn bridges. It leaves you stranded on the very island you set on fire. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's walking away and never looking back.